you folks joining us, that's okay. Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Smithson, and I am WLAM's Vice President. I would like to welcome you to today's program, Women of the Supreme Court, a conversation with two of the women leading Michigan's highest court at the turn of the century. I would also like to introduce the moderator of today's extraordinary program, Carolyn Sullivan. Carolyn will soon be an associate at Varnum in Grand Rapids in its labor and employment practice group. She is a graduate of Michigan State University College of Law and Grand Valley State University. And she's also a highly valued member of WLAM's Historic Preservation Committee. Carolyn?
Thank you, Nicole. Welcome, everyone. Today I have the pleasure of moderating, as Nicole stated, and I also have the pleasure of introducing Justices Kelly and Corrigan. So let's get started. First, Justice Kelly was a justice on the Michigan Supreme Court from 1997 through 2012 and was Chief Justice from 2009 to 2011. She is also a past president of WLAM and is currently the distinguished jurist in residence at Wayne State University Law School. Welcome, Justice Kelly. Justice Corrigan served on the Michigan Supreme Court from 1998 to 2011 and is Chief Justice from 2001 to 2004. She is also the former director of the Michigan Department of Human Services and is currently counsel to Butzel. Welcome, Justice Corrigan.
Thank you, Carolyn.
A couple reminders as we start off here. Please feel free to submit any questions in the chat box in case we have additional time at the end of the panel for crowd questions. Also, a reminder that these should not be political questions or questions about specific case decisions. We really want to focus in on Justice Corrigan's and Kelly's past experiences today. So I'd love to start with some background questions on what brought you into the legal field before we dive into some advice in your careers. So on that note, what made you decide to go to law school?
First, may I say, I'm very honored to be here with my former colleague, Marilyn Kelly. It's good to see you, Marilyn, and I hope I'll see you at the Supreme Court Historical Society luncheon in a couple of weeks. But it's good to reminisce and hard to hear us described as turn-of-the-century justices. I'm glad to be here with you. I'll tackle the first question. Why did I go to law school? I'm the first generation of my family, the first woman in my family to graduate from college. And my grandparents were Irish immigrants. My mother's parents came as adults to this country. They were not well educated, but they valued education. On my father's side, they came a little bit earlier, and they too valued education. They were not well educated. My grandpa was a fireman. My grandmother was a housewife who went to the 8th grade. My other grandmother went to the 2nd. I was blessed to be the child of a physician and a nurse, and I was the oldest of 7 children. They had 6 daughters and 1 son at the tail end. I'm a baby boomer. And post-World War II, they had babies fast. So when I was 6 years old, I already had 6. There were 6 of us. I had twins, number 5 and 6. They had babies fast, and that was what happened. My dad was a physician, and he was quite a wonderful one. And as a little girl, I loved my dad. I worked in his medical office. He taught me how to run an EKG machine when I was very young, and I would administer EKGs to patients. Probably that's medical malpractice today. But when I was about 15, though, we had a very telling discussion. My dad taught medical school, and he told me that I might want to be a doctor, but he would never vote to admit me to medical school because I was taking up a man's seat. Needless to say, for a 15-year-old, that was heart-crushing. I did forgive my father for that, but I went in a different direction. I went to Marygrove College in Detroit. I had a wonderful time there. I was very engaged in politics. I was a social work major, and I did my field work placement at the old Recorder's Court in Detroit, where I saw lawyers like Justin Ravitz and Ken Cockrell. I wanted to be a lawyer and went to law school on my own, despite my father's protestations of me taking up a man's seat. And I love the law, and I'm very grateful for that. And I will make one footnote that my father became reconciled to women in the profession, and he actually campaigned with me as I was elected to the Supreme Court right before his death in 2001. So that's my short story about how I went to law school.
I'll pick up there and begin by saying what a pleasure it is for me to have the opportunity to see Justice Corrigan again, and I will see you at lunch at the Supreme Court Historical Society annual meeting. It's a pleasure for me to be with women lawyers, as always, because of my fond memories of the organization, what it's meant to me over my career. And I look on the members here and envy many of you for having your careers spread out in front of you as they are. Like Justice Corrigan, I came from a background of hardworking people who did not have the benefit of a college education. I was the first in my family who graduated from college, and I grew up in Detroit, went to the Detroit public schools, didn't know on graduation what I planned to do with myself, so I decided I'd be a teacher. I went to Eastern Michigan University because they offered a nice scholarship, and I became interested in foreign language and travel abroad, and ultimately then was able to take a year abroad to do a master's program after graduation through La Sorbonne, which is the University of Paris, with the thought of teaching French, getting a PhD in teaching French as a career. I began doing that in the Grosse Pointe Public Schools, and then at Albion College, when it turns out Michigan was about to change and adopt a new constitution, and I found myself presented with the opportunity of running for the State Board of Education. And since I felt I knew a lot about education by the ripe old age of 25, I ran for that board and was elected statewide. So I looked then at 4 years on the State Board of Education with individuals who were older than me and more experienced in many ways. We were all facing implementing a brand new constitutional provision regarding the State Board of Education. And in doing that, we were offered frequent work with the Attorney General, matters of interpreting our powers and authority and responsibility on this new board. And the more I was in contact with this legal part of the world, the more I grew attracted to it, and then finally decided that I would not go on for a PhD, but instead go to law school. So I changed professions, if you will, in my late 20s and was accepted at Wayne State.
Wow. Thank you both for that. That was incredible background. Along those lines, then, proceeding to when you got to law school, how many women attended law school with you, and how were you treated by male classmates and professors?
I'll go next, if that's all right. I loved law school. I liked college better, frankly, and the first year of law school I found extremely daunting. It wasn't nearly as interesting as college had been. The first week of law school, there were 6 women in my class, but by the end of the first week, I think there were 2 of us left. There was just a handful of women back then, and I started in 1969. And then it was still quite unusual for a woman to go to law school. But I was in the mode of Ken Cockrell and Justin Ravitz, and I was interested in doing it. And I found tremendous support among my male colleagues. let me say that there were professors. We had a thing called Ladies' Day. I remember that, when my professor of federal jurisdiction only called on me to recite on various difficult cases that day. And I had another professor for criminal law, a judge who will not be named, who would only call on the women in the class for the rape cases. I was working my way through law school as a probation officer, and I frankly did not care if the judge called on me for the rape cases, because I had to work on those sorts of cases in the old recorder's court as a probation officer doing pre-sentence investigations. So I wasn't fazed by anything the judge asked me, and I would stand and recite about the rape case with nothing that would bother me about it, and it didn't bother my male colleagues either. But that's those two professors who had perhaps not good thoughts about women lawyers. And I remember then I was put in the appellate division when I became a lawyer, because there was sort of a bias against women trial lawyers. And that perhaps others of you on this call have experienced that. But many of the males were biased against women as trial attorneys. However, I had a wonderful time at the law school. I was elected president of the Student Bar Association. I was the first woman in the United States to be admitted to a law fraternity, Phi Alpha Delta, because my colleagues in Phi Alpha Delta at University of Detroit Mercy sent me as their representative to the New Orleans National Conference, where they spent 3 days deciding what to do with me, and finally voted to admit me as a member of Phi Alpha Delta. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm an honorary member today. I mean, I'm still a member of Phi Alpha Delta, but they've named an award after me because of my willingness to go forward and break a bar barrier back then. And that was due to my male colleagues saying, this is ridiculous. Women should be lawyers. They should be fully admitted to law fraternities. And that was the students at the University of Detroit who thought that. So I've talked a long time, but I will say that I'm very proud to have a degree from the University of Detroit. It was then U of D, but U of D Mercy. And the professors who were against us were far outnumbered by those who supported us.
I had similar experiences. I started law school in 1968. There were about 100 in my night school class and about 6 women. And not all 6 did though survive to complete their degree. However, I will say this, that of those who did survive, we graduated at the top of the class. We were treated very well by the male students, and almost all the professors treated us well. I think there was only maybe one exception that I can remember. It's unfortunate that one remembers the exception in this situation like this, but the one I remember picked out one of the 6 of us as being particularly sensitive to some subject matters, and learned that she found it very awkward to describe what loss of consortium was, and drilled her and grilled her over the significance of it until she was practically in tears. But that's the only instance I saw of a professor overtly, at least, discriminating against any of us because we were women. I think there was probably some covert discrimination, but frankly, I don't believe it mattered a lot. I think we were given a good opportunity. Unlike Justice Corrigan, because I went to night school, I didn't have the advantage of joining sororities or fraternities, or even doing moot court and a good number of other activities. Today, night students, I gather, do have those opportunities. And so that kind of bias or discrimination wasn't one based on race or religion. It was or gender. It was based on where we went to the law school, night or day. even so, I thought I had a good education, an excellent education at Wayne, and I've always been appreciative of it.
That's
Just
great. Thank you.
by way of follow-up, I was a night law student till I was elected student bar president. They gave me a scholarship that year, so I was able to go to school full-time, and I was actually hired by Judge John Gillis that year and became a law clerk at the then really infant Court of Appeals. And that helped me to raise the money that I needed to survive. So I did a lot of this as a probation officer during the day, a night law student. I had a tremendous amount of energy. I still do, but I had more energy then. So I did everything that I could do at the law school, and still I have great friends from the law school. I still work hard for my alma mater now, and I'm very involved with university development and raising scholarship money, and very grateful for the law degree from the University of Detroit Mercy.
Well, thank you both. That was great information, and equal parts, sad and good to hear at the same time, based on your experiences. But could you both tell me what your first job was like?
Do you want me to go first on that one, Maura?
Yeah, you go ahead, Marilyn. Yeah.
I ran into a lot of discrimination when I first began practicing. The first job I had was actually clerking at a labor law firm, and I enjoyed the work and was seriously considering going into labor law as a specialty when I ran into a problem with one of the partners who effectively invited me to do depositions with him in Washington, D.C., and then told me it would be required that I not tell anybody in the firm that I was going. And when I told him that I didn't feel comfortable doing that, I found that he became hostile and would not give me work, and really wouldn't even talk to me. It was such a difficult situation that I don't know that I could have continued with the firm, but as it turns out, the firm split up maybe 6 months after. So there was dissension within the firm in any event. So my first effort at the practicing law was a difficult one. It wasn't the only difficult one I had, but it might have been quite representative of what many women in the law were going through at that time.
My first law job, as I indicated, was nothing unlike what Chief Justice Kelly has just described. I had a very blessed experience with John Gillis. Back then, the Michigan Court of Appeals had just started, and there were only 9 judges on the Court of Appeals. And Judge Gillis was allowed to hire a part-timer, so I started as a senior in law school as one of his 2 law clerks. He was Chief Judge Pro Tem, so he got 2 clerks. And I had the most lovely time with Judge Gillis and a lawyer named Bill Wolfram, who might be known to some of you. He's since passed away at a very young age. But I was taken, I wasn't in the pre-hearing section, and Otto Stockmeyer was already there working at the Court of Appeals way back then. But I wasn't in pre-hearing. I was a law clerk, and I learned to write from Judge Gillis and Bill Wolfram. Judge Gillis was a tremendous judge, a great personality, and the original 9 were something to behold. Charles Levin, T. John Lazinski, S. Jerome Bronson, later, of course, committed suicide after he was arrested for taking bribes, but he was in the office next door, and he would try to borrow me to write draft opinions. Justice Levin tried to hire me as his clerk when he got elected to the Supreme Court, and Soapy Williams asked me to clerk for him as well. There was a judge's lunch table, and the clerks and the judges ate lunch in the basement of the First Federal Building. And what an experience that was to meet these historical figures and be able to lunch with them and learn from them. But I learned lessons there about writing that have stayed with me my whole life. For example, Judge Gillis had an 11-word sentence rule. I wrote in the passive voice, and he would go with his red pen and just rip me to shreds because I didn't use an active noun and an active verb. And the 11-word sentence rule was a great one because it taught you to write short and simple. And I'm sure Justice Kelly shares this with me, but you want to rip your hair out when you're sitting on the Supreme Court. When you read these extremely long sentences written by people, they think they're being highfalutin or something, or they're impressing their clients, and they make it virtually impossible to understand what is being said. So I learned that. I learned The Elements of Style by E.B. White, and I had these huge opportunities at learning at the feet of masters. So I was very lucky. And then I full-time clerked for John Gillis for 2 years. From that, I was hired by Patty Boyle and Terry Boyle to become an assistant prosecutor in Wayne County. And Patty Boyle was my boss, and she was phenomenal. So I was very blessed at the beginning of my career.
That's great to hear. And I think we all have a new item on our reading list for those who have not read it. The Elements of Style by E.B. White. When and how did both of you decide you wanted to ascend to the bench?
I know that it came in my case gradually. As I practiced law, I began to get a feel for where I was most comfortable and where my passion lay, if you will. I've greatly enjoyed the practice of law, and I did it for 17 years before I did go to the bench. But over that period, gradually, I became aware that I was more comfortable in doing the work that judges do than I was as doing the work that lawyers do. And so I began to search out possibilities for the bench, but I did that probably a good 10 years before I ultimately ran and was elected to the Court of Appeals. I guess the lesson here is that sometimes it takes a while for people to quite get their bearings and really become confident with where they belong and what gives them the greatest pleasure in the world of work. And that was the case with me. But again, it took a good 17 years before I got there.
Unlike Justice Kelly, I had no judicial aspirations whatsoever. I was practicing law at Plunkett and Cooney, and I loved it. And I'll say this, I've loved every day of my legal career. I hope that you love it the same way that I did. I thought every case was a challenge. I tried to get in the middle of it. I was a banking lawyer back then, back in the late 80s, and I was working on the S&L crisis, lots of parallels with what's happening today with our banking crisis. In any event, many of you know my late husband, Joe Grano. We had just been to the Mayo Clinic. Joe had a twitch in his little finger back then, and we didn't know what it was. And they, at that time, diagnosed that it was Parkinson's disease. And they said that we needed to reduce the stress in our lives. And I was thinking about that because I was working enormous hours, making a lot of money at Plunkett. I bought my first ranch mink coat with my first bonus from Plunkett. So we were doing really well. But in any event, out of left field came this illness to my husband, and came back, and they had said reduce stress. And lo and behold, and I've always thought of this as a gift of the Holy Spirit, the very next morning on my first day back from the Mayo Clinic with Joe was a phone call from Governor Engler's legal counsel, Lucille Taylor. And she said, Governor Engler would like to appoint you to the Court of Appeals. And I wasn't looking for it, but it was like I said, a gift of the Holy Spirit. I said, well, I'm very taken aback by that. I need to discuss it with my husband. And I went home and I thought about it. We talked about it for a couple days. And I called her back and said, all right, I'd like to pursue it. And Engler was very serious, and I went through the Judicial Qualifications Commission and got good ratings. And I had been very active in the bar up till then. I had been Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney and federal prosecutor, and I had won several awards. So, but I wasn't looking to become a judge. And I was glad when I got on the Court of Appeals, because like Justice Kelly, I loved the work, and I was glad when I got there. But I must say that I missed being an advocate, because I thought that was great also. I loved the courtroom. I loved walking in, and maybe there was a judge in the courtroom, but I wanted the courtroom to revolve around me. And I wanted people to think that even though the judge was sitting on the bench, I was really in charge. So I missed that part of advocacy, but that's how I got to the bench.
So we got to the bench in different ways, because I got there through election, not appointment. But I think it's important for you to know that one of the reasons I gained the courage to run for the court, this was the Court of Appeals, was because of my work with women lawyers. I'd become president of the Women's Bar Association, and then the Women Lawyers Association after that, and served, of course, on the board any number of years. And little by little, I gained confidence and self-assurance, partly through that work. And I think the recognition that I had as president of Women Lawyers gave me an opportunity to put myself forward as a candidate for the Court of Appeals with some real credibility. Credibility I would have lacked, I think, had I not had that experience. So I think it's important to realize that I owe a lot to women lawyers for having been able to become a judge in the first place.
I want to underscore what Justice Kelly just said. Along the way, before I got on the Court of Appeals, I had been president of the Incorporated Society of Irish American Lawyers and also president of the Federal Bar Association. So while I wasn't active in women lawyers, I was very involved in bar activities. I had been on the jury instructions committee. I think there's nothing that it's really important to underscore the critical role that participation in bar activities has for your development as a lawyer. And if you're interested in becoming a judge, it's crucial to participate in these activities. So I shared Justice Kelly's thoughts about the confidence that you gain from participation and the friendships that you make. And it's crucial. Relationships matter wherever you are in life, but particularly I think in the law, it's wonderful that you have women lawyers or Irish lawyers or the federal bar, whatever the case may be, that you form relationships outside of just the work.
So I'd like everyone to remember that, especially as I make a reminder at the end of today's panel about membership. But for now, I'll say thank you both for emphasizing those relationships for us. What was it like to be a woman justice on the Michigan Supreme Court?
Well, let me start by saying what it was like to be a judge on the Court of Appeals and then a justice on the Supreme Court. What I noticed most was the different world I lived in the day I became a judge. Many of my friends who I'd practiced law with no longer felt quite the same in terms of their candor with me, because in fact, they did have to worry that they might be appearing before me, expressing, of course, representing the interests of a client. a certain barrier goes up when one becomes a judge that one has no control over. It's necessary. It's a professional barrier, but it is a little awkward from a social point of view. One has to become accustomed to the new role. I found, for example, that whenever I told jokes before I became a judge, I got moderate laughs. After I told jokes, the same jokes, after I became a judge, they were enormously funny. And this is part of the danger, I think, of being a judge, is that you can easily let the experience go to your head. And I think it's to the great credit of many judges that they can avoid the black robe disease, as it's called, and retain their humanity, even though they have enormous power and influence. But certainly having that power and influence was a big part of being a Supreme Court justice. And I became aware when I got on that court that whether I liked it or not, I'd become a role model for many, and many women in particular. They were looking up to me and imitating or trying to emulate me. And I began to be more and more self-conscious about what I was doing and saying, knowing that people were watching and trying to go by my example. It's sort of comical in a way, but it's true. The fact that a judge, a woman judge in particular, was an unusual person in our society for many years, and many of the early years that we were judges, Justice Corrigan and I, we really had to be aware that people were watching us and following our example.
I totally concur with what Marilyn just had to say about becoming a judge and the situation that it places you in. I remember when I got on the Court of Appeals, the phone didn't ring anymore. And I was used to being active, and I was so lonely. All I was doing was reading briefs and getting ready. And back then we had the horrible backlog at the Court of Appeals. We had the guilty plea appeals that were endless. And we didn't have enough judges, and we had an overwhelming backlog of cases. So you were doing an opinion a day. It was quite demanding, and just staying current with what was going on was difficult. It was like being back in law school, but no friends. So you had to find your own way, and you begin to understand why black robe disease happens, because judges get cut off from their normal relationships, and then they start to think of themselves as really special because you have the power of decision making. And I found that extremely difficult. Thank God I came from a big family, and I was the oldest and the most bookish one in my family. So my family cut me down to size all the time. They would say things about how little Maura knew. And I was grateful for them, because I couldn't catch black robe disease very well because my family would be on my case. And my husband was on my case, Joe Grano, who I just adored and I miss every day. He's been dead 21 years, and I miss him each and every day. But he was certainly very concerned about what would happen to me on the bench, especially at the Supreme Court. Many of you know Joe, and you know his philosophy and how concerned he was about judges and the role of judges in our society. So being married to Joe Grano made sure that I couldn't catch black robe disease. But I'm very concerned about black robe disease among judges, and I hope that those of you on the call who aren't judges might understand how you can catch it.
Thank you. So what differences do you see in the challenges that women faced in the legal profession in the early 2000s versus the challenges that you see women facing today?
I definitely see challenges that women are facing today. I teach at the law school at Wayne now, and it's a wonderful opportunity for me to observe young people who are about to become lawyers. And it gives me some opportunity to see what they're going through. And I see them experiencing a tremendous level of stress. Partly, I think, because the pandemic has entered into their education, and partly because of the enormous competition these days. There was competition certainly when I was practicing, but I'm not sure it was quite as bad as it is today. However, discrimination against women was worse then, particularly overt discrimination. I see less overt discrimination today against women. But back when I was starting the profession, it was not thought to be unusual to single a woman out and say that she ought not to do litigation because she doesn't have big fists. When I interviewed for a job at an admiralty firm, I desperately wanted to do admiralty law. One of the young men interviewing me, the attorney there, wanted to know how I would go about climbing up, getting on a shipboard in order to do a review of a cargo damage case, as if, for some reason, women couldn't climb up on a ship, but men could. I remember being very offended by that kind of discrimination and having to fight against it. I think that there were fewer people willing to be mentors of women lawyers back in those days. And mentorship, of course, is enormously important. And I also think there were fewer, as I've said before, women role models for women lawyers to follow. I don't think sometimes young people, I think I didn't realize how much I looked for someone to emulate when I was trying to figure out just what it looked like to be a woman lawyer and how one should behave. Those are the biggest differences that I can see.
I again concur with what Justice Kelly had to say. In my own case, I was very blessed because I had 3 amazing mentors, and I had some difficulties as an assistant Wayne County prosecutor. I remember one supervisor who would talk about women being on the rag, and I got assigned to the cases involving prostitution. I got assigned to the Anderson's Gardens case. I think I was assigned to those cases because I was a woman, but I loved those cases, and we had some great successes. I got to know Carl Levin and Mike Graham from the Detroit Free Press. We shut Anderson's Gardens as a public nuisance. I worked on that case for years and argued it in the Michigan Supreme Court. So things that supervisors perhaps thought for a disadvantage became advantages to me. But along the way, in my career as a prosecutor and as a federal prosecutor, I was blessed, besides having Patricia Boyle as a mentor, Cornelia Kennedy was a mentor to me, and Dorothy Comstock Riley. And all 3 of those women who came up well before Marilyn and I did, had astounding experiences of discrimination. Cornelia Kennedy suffered a great deal. Patty Boyle, I think, couldn't get a job as a woman when she graduated from law school. Dorothy Comstock Riley, the same thing. They were great role models, and I'm very grateful that I was taken under their wing on my way. Judge Kennedy once, when I was arguing a case in Cincinnati, and I saw her and she took me to lunch, and she showed me the desk at which the first woman sat or stood who was on the Sixth Circuit. And she worked at that desk every day because she was never invited to go to lunch with her male colleagues. That's the kind of discrimination women once faced. But thank God, we faced other kinds of discrimination It seems to me that that's gone. But I want to say for women now, I think it's enormously difficult. And I look at it with my own daughter and my daughter-in-law, Mary Ann Grano, who's a phenomenal young lawyer with Keenbaum Hardy and Viviano with their law firm. And I look at the concerns that my daughter and daughter-in-law have about how divided our culture is and how their children are affected and how they're affected every day. And I'm really concerned, and I'll say this and unabashedly, I'm concerned about our woke culture and what that does to our profession. And I'll go back to my nuns that I had coming up when we learned logical fallacies. I know that that's not taught anymore. And I think about a lot of wokeness, not all of it, but a lot of it involves this logical fallacy called argumentum ad hominem. Another way of calling it is name calling. That's not argument. That isn't what we learn in court or do in court. And that's taken over our culture. And if people actually had to learn logic, if they had to learn grammar, if they were taught the rules of argumentation, I don't think our culture would be so affected. But that's gone. And unfortunately, our children and our grandchildren and women and men, women and men, are affected by this overlay in our culture that has nothing to do with what our country's made of and what the heart of the Michigan Supreme Court or any court is, rational argument. We've lost that. And as a 74-year-old who's been practicing law for 50 years this year, I rue that. And I wish that there was a way that we, as a culture and as a society, that we would go back to the way it was.
So thank you both. I think we're getting nearer to the end, so I just wanted to open it up to the audience in case there are any questions. Otherwise, I can come back with a couple of more.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, both justices, for being here. This has been an incredible experience. And thank you, Carolyn, for moderating. I do have a question, if I may, and having heard so much about your illustrative careers, what advice do you have, particularly maybe for some newer lawyers or even for law students, about the concept of work-life balance, particularly I think for women in the field? We get this question and we get this thought a lot, and I'd love to get your opinions on it. Thank you so much.
Marilyn?
Okay, so the question is, what is our advice with respect to women? Well, I didn't quite hear it all.
I'm so sorry, Your Honor. Work-life balance and the concept.
Oh, work-life
of that.
balance, right. You know, it's interesting, Christina, that you should mention that, because from my earliest years, I can remember this being a problem women had to deal with. And it's never really gone away. And I guess it's not surprising when you think of it. It's just one would expect that we would have made maybe more progress in this whole area than we have. It's very difficult. One has to make some difficult choices along the way in trying to balance the family life, the responsibility for being a good spouse and being a good parent, with the responsibilities of professional life. I'm seeing women handling this better, in my opinion, today than I believe they did when I was a young lawyer. I think women are more self-confident, and the word has gone out that spouses, significant others need to take a role in the responsibility of home life. Clearly, if a woman wants to do well in the legal profession and she's married, she needs to have a spouse or significant other who is willing to share the load and cooperate. Otherwise, I just don't see how a woman can do the job, both jobs, and not wear herself to a total frazzle, really injure maybe her health and well-being. So choosing the right person that you're that you live with is a good start, I think, in making life balance work. And then, of course, just being conscious of the problem. I think learning to handle stress is very important. I went through a period when I became aware what stress really was, and actually studied it for a while. I remember reading Salye on stress in order to figure out what effect it was having on me. And then years later, when I got on the Supreme Court, I became aware how many lawyers suffer from the stress caused by the difficulty, not just of practicing law, but of balancing home life and the profession, and the extent to which the stress imperiled their professional well-being and future, as well as their health. So it's a serious question, one that we need to face straight on and be conscious of in order to handle well.
I flunked this, Christina, because I was terrible at work-life balance. There were 4 of us, my husband, my son, and my daughter. And well, my husband and I were workaholics, and we inflicted that on our children. And unfortunately, at this age, I'm experiencing a lot of health problems. I like to say my body's now a billing opportunity because I never did a very good job of taking care of myself. I think my daughter and my son-in-law and my son and my daughter-in-law are doing way better at that because they have exercise. That's something that I didn't do. I always thought of work as play. So I loved everything, and I was a jogger for a while, but I never took it seriously. And I think that's essential. One thing that matters to me deeply is my faith, and that helps me have balance. And I'm very committed to my church and my parish, and I'm actually a candidate for a lay religious order right now that has given me great comfort, and I look forward to becoming a member of this lay religious order. That helps me to keep my head anchored, knowing it's not all about me, that I'm here for a reason beyond myself. My service on the court, it matters to me. The lawyer's oath, what we said, St. Thomas More, all that matters. And it may be that you're not religious, but you have to find something, if it's not religion, but find something that's beyond yourself. And then all the things that we know about routine, about breaks, all these things that I think women and men are doing better today than they did. But I'm concerned that there's this lack in our culture, and that so many people are rootless. And there's so many people that we call nuns today. And I think that that's so challenging, that we need to find a solution for that that's about us, not about me.
Thank you both so very much. Really appreciate it.
So with that, we are nearing the end here. Justices Kelly and Corrigan, is there anything else that you would like to share with us? A final thought or statement, piece of advice?
I'll just say that I'm extremely grateful for the career that I've had. It's been an adventure every day. What's life like after the bench? I've never stopped loving the practice of law and the opportunities that it's presented to me, all the way from being an assistant prosecutor way back when, being a law clerk to John Gillis, to even going to the White House to be considered for the United States Supreme Court. It's been a heck of a ride, and every day I'm still in this great adventure. So I'm grateful to God, grateful to all of you, grateful to the people of Michigan for electing me. I had 4 statewide campaigns. I'm just grateful. And I just encourage all of you to live your dream, love what you do. If you don't love it, get out and find what you love.
Yes, I can pick up on that. I think finding your passion, as I indicated a little earlier, is crucial to really enjoying working in the law. So many people do it, work in the law, and don't enjoy it, and often really burn out as a consequence. I think the secret, if there can be said to be a secret, of having a long and successful career is finding your niche in the law, a niche that's truly normal and pleasurable for you, one that doesn't involve working under conditions that you don't look forward to going to every day when you wake up, but rather that are a passion. I found that judging was really my passion, and I know it made it possible for me to go on as long as I have, and it's now over 50 years for me. I'm, as I say, not practicing, but I am teaching law. I often notice that students today, and this has probably been true forever, but students today are so concerned about making a bad decision career-wise that they're almost paralyzed with fear. It seems to me that one has to be willing to take a chance to make a mistake from time to time in these choices, because mistakes are almost inevitable. I certainly made them in the course of my career, but what was important was I was able to bounce back from them. I think having the temerity or the courage to get out there and take a few chances are part of the secret of having a good and successful career. So I recommend a certain amount of chance taking to young lawyers.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Justices Corrigan and Kelly, for being with us today, for your dedicated service to our state and to our profession. I personally think I could have listened to you both speak all day, and I enjoy greatly hearing about what's led you to not only your roles in the Court of Appeals, but the Michigan Supreme Court and in general to law school. This has been a very unique opportunity for me, and I think for all of us. So thank you both for sharing these parts of your careers and lives with us.
Thank you. And thank you, Marilyn. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure,
See you in a-
Mark.
See you in a couple weeks. Thank you to the women lawyers, and